Hi, my name's Melody, and my mom didn't ask me to play at my sister's wedding. She ordered me to. I stand in a faded beige dress that looks nothing like the wedding party's soft pink gradient. I'm tucked away by the speaker stack, not on the stage where I belong. My stomach churns with anger as I realize I'm just background noise for her favorite daughter's perfect day. They expected me to stay silent. They thought I'd sit there like an obedient little shadow and disappear into the piano keys while my fingers did their bidding. But I didn't play what they gave me. My heart pounds remembering it. I played everything they tried to erase from my life. And when the speakers suddenly cut to my father's voice, when everyone heard the truth they had buried, the room turned against the ones who had kept me in the shadows all these years. Their faces, I can still see the shock and shame. Trust me, once you've witnessed that kind of reckoning, you never forget it. Before we dive in, what time are you listening and where from? Drop a comment below and tell me. Have you ever been used by your own family just to make someone else shine? The pain of that betrayal cuts deeper than any stranger's knife. The envelope arrived on a Thursday. No return address, just cream-colored cardstock with a gold border and my mailbox number written in shaky pen strokes that I didn't recognize. For a moment, my heart skipped as I wondered if it might be a response to my recent recital series. Then I opened it, my fingers trembling slightly against the expensive paper. Inside was a wedding invitation, Sophia's wedding. My sister, or more accurately, Elaine's daughter, the golden child who could do no wrong. It read, "You are cordially invited to the wedding of Sophia Wren and Nathan Hayes. We would love for you to be part of this special day as our music provider subject to change." No name, no personal touch, just that clinical label. Music provider, subject to change. As if I were a rental service they might cancel if something better came along. I stared at it so long the corners started to curl from the sweat of my fingers. There wasn't even a formal greeting. No dear Melody. No, we hope you'll join us. Just the cold assumption that I'd show up, play something forgettable, stay silent and leave without anyone noticing I was ever there. My thumb brushed over the embossed ink, pressing hard enough to feel the indentation. Hoping it might somehow reveal kinder words beneath, it didn't. The paper just crinkled under the pressure of my disappointment. I folded the card twice slowly, each crease sharp and deliberate, then pressed it flat again and buried it inside the drawer under my dish towels, where I hide things that hurt too much to look at. The light in my kitchen was warm that early summer afternoon. The artistic little town I'd settled in was bustling with creative energy, but all I felt was the familiar heaviness in my chest that came whenever I thought about my family. I had a lesson to teach at the community centre where I worked since dropping out of music college years ago. My student, Emma 12, braces, big brown eyes full of musical potential, was waiting when I arrived, bouncing with excitement. As I tuned the upright Yamaha, she bounced on the bench and said, "Miss Wren, I saw your sister in Bridal Style magazine at Walgreens. She's so beautiful with all those fancy people around her." I felt my smile freeze on my face, not reaching my eyes. "She's getting married soon," I said, adjusting the music stand with more force than necessary. "Big wedding with all the important people in attendance." Emma tilted her head, curious eyes studying my tense shoulders. "Will you be playing at it?" I didn't answer. The question pierced something raw inside me. I handed her the sheet music and asked her to play the scales, forcing enthusiasm into my voice. But inside, I felt that familiar burning sensation behind my ribs. That mixture of hurt and anger that flares up whenever someone says my sister's name like it's coated in gold, while mine feels like an afterthought if mentioned at all. Sophia always belonged in the spotlight. Even as kids, she was the one with perfectly matching hair ribbons and piano recitals that ended with bouquets and standing ovations. I was always the quiet one in the corner, clapping until my hands hurt, smiling until my cheeks ached, just desperate to feel like I belonged in the same family. After class, I sat in my car for nearly an hour before heading home. The dashboard clock glowed 5:42 p.m., but I couldn't bring myself to start the engine. I watched the children spill out of the centre, laughing and running with backpacks swinging wildly, and my heart ached for that carefree joy I once thought would be mine forever. My phone rang, sending a jolt through my body. "Elaine," my mother. "Hi, Mom," I answered, already feeling my shoulders tense and my jaw tighten. "Oh, good," she said, her voice crisp and efficient. "I was hoping to catch you. We're finalizing the details for Sophia's wedding." I waited, gripping the steering wheel with my free hand until my knuckles turned white. She continued without noticing my silence. Sophia wants everything tasteful, elegant, no distractions or disruptions. So we need you to play something light background music only. Nothing dramatic or showy, of course. We can't have you ruining her special day. I could hear the clink of her expensive silverware against fine china as she stirred something, multitasking as always. Her voice carried that familiar dismissive tone, like I was just another item on her checklist somewhere between seating charts and floral arrangements. It's not really about the music, she added with a little laugh. It's about her day, so just something simple and forgettable. Nothing that would make people pay attention to the pianist instead of the bride. My hand tightened around the phone until the case creaked. I could feel the muscles in my arms shaking with suppressed fury. But my voice came out soft and steady. Sure, whatever you need. I'll be invisible as usual. Great, she chirped, not catching my sarcasm. Oh, and one more thing. Don't worry about dressing up too much. It's not like anyone will be looking at you anyway. When I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for what felt like hours. Just sat there, my hand still wrapped around the phone like it was the only thing anchoring me to reality, while my mind screamed with all the things I wanted to say but never could. The bitter taste of resentment filled my mouth as I realized we weren't a family, we were just actors in Elaine's perfect life production. Later that evening, I opened my email to look for rehearsal details. Elaine had forwarded the guest list. I scrolled past names I didn't recognize: Chair of Foundation, Dr. Mendes Plowen, Aunt Shell, maybe wealthy patrons, and influential contacts my mother had cultivated over years of climbing the social ladder. Then I found it. Melody Wren, piano girl, try not to overdress or draw attention. My fingers trembled as I closed the laptop slowly. On my bookshelf, tucked inside a pale blue folder from years ago, was an old recital program I'd kept like a precious relic. I hadn't opened it in years. It was from my senior performance before everything fell apart, before my dreams were stolen from me. There it was in beautiful looping script, Melody Wren, soloist. I traced the letters with my finger, feeling tears burn behind my eyes. Then I folded the program and slid it into the same drawer as the wedding invitation. Side by side, one said who I truly was, the other who they wanted me to be. She thought agreeing to play was my peace offering, my surrender. She didn't realize it was just the opening act of her public humiliation. The package arrived late Friday morning. No note, no brand tag, just a plain brown box with my address and Elaine's name as the sender. The sight of it sitting on my doorstep made my stomach clench. I carried it inside and set it on the small kitchen table, the one I used for sorting bills and lesson plans, and lately, collecting the remnants of my shattered self-esteem. I cut the tape and pulled back the flaps, my heart racing with dread. Inside was a gown folded in a clear plastic garment bag that had yellowed with age. The dress wasn't champagne, wasn't blush, wasn't cream. It was beige, dingy faded beige. The color of forgotten things, of walls in abandoned buildings, of things meant to be overlooked. It had a visibly worn hem and a neckline that dipped awkwardly off-center, like someone had attempted to alter it once and then given up halfway through. The fabric smelled musty, like it had been pulled from the back of a storage closet. I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation just holding it. I walked to the living room and held it up in front of the mirror, my hands shaking with anger. It looked nothing like the group photo Sophia had posted on Instagram earlier that week, 6 bridesmaids standing in a perfectly coordinated soft pink gradient, each dress expertly tailored to their bodies, hair professionally styled and gleaming under carefully arranged lighting. Mine didn't belong in the same event, let alone the same photo. It was clearly intended to make me invisible. With trembling fingers, I grabbed my phone and texted Elaine. Me, hey, is this the right dress? Mine looks completely different than the others. It's old and doesn't even fit properly. Her reply came instantly, making my phone buzz with cruel efficiency. Elaine, it's neutral. You'll be hidden at the piano anyway. Nobody's going to look at you. Don't make this about yourself. I stared at those words until they blurred, not because they surprised me, but because of how they still had the power to wound me so deeply. A part of me kept foolishly hoping that someday she'd write back with, "Oops, that was a mistake. You deserve better. I'm sorry for how I've treated you." I packed the dress into my travel garment bag and reminded myself to breathe through the tightness in my chest. I had a rehearsal dinner to endure with a fake smile plastered on my face. By late afternoon, I was walking through the doors of the Rosemore Inn, where the welcome dinner was being held. The main dining hall smelled of garlic and fresh-cut hydrangeas. Guests were already filtering in, friends of the groom, cousins from out of state, all dressed impeccably. Some with name tags, others just mingling with polite champagne grins and air kisses. My eyes scanned the room until I spotted my name folded in a tiny card, separated from the main tables at what appeared to be a small side table normally reserved for venue staff. My chair was right next to the swinging door leading into the catering kitchen. A waiter approached with a pitcher, offering me water with a quick glance and the kind of professional nod they give to other service personnel, not guests or family members. A few minutes later, Sophia made her entrance, glowing in soft silk and flawless makeup. Her hair was styled into effortless waves that must have taken hours to perfect. She spotted me and walked over with the kind of air kiss that leaves no lipstick and no warmth. "Oh, good. You actually made it," she said with artificial brightness. "I told the planner you'd be here for the music stuff so they didn't have to include you in the family seating chart. You're good with something classical and boring, right? Simple. I told everyone you'd be fine with simple. We don't need anything fancy or attention-grabbing." Her tone was light and dismissive, like she was discussing unimportant background details with a vendor. I felt my jaw tighten but forced a single stiff nod. "Of course," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "Simple's my specialty. I've had years of practice being forgettable." Before I could sit, Nathan approached with his family in tow. He extended a hand with a politician's smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You must be Melody," he said, mispronouncing my name slightly. "Sophia mentioned you were the family pianist or something." The groom's mother, a tall woman in an expensive burgundy wrap dress, leaned in with condescending interest. "That's sweet," she said, patting my arm like I was a child. "It's so important to have trusted hired help at a big event like this. Did you go to school with Sophia's regular accompanist?" "Hired help?" I felt my face flush hot with humiliation. I opened my mouth to correct her, but Elaine had already swooped into the circle, champagne in hand, wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. She laughed with practiced charm, brushing the comment off like it didn't expose the truth of how they saw me. "Melody's been playing piano since she was a little girl." "She's always been reliable." "Not quite professional level, of course, but dependable for background music." "Reliable. Not talented, not accomplished, just dependable. The way you talk about a kitchen appliance or someone who waters your plants when you're on vacation." I felt each word like a needle under my skin. I held my breath and forced my lips into a smile that felt like it might crack my face. We sat down at our respective tables, mine isolated near the kitchen entrance. I picked at the edges of my plate while the rest of the room clinked glasses and laughed like old friends sharing inside jokes. Occasionally someone would glance my way, maybe to confirm I hadn't abandoned my post. But no one asked me anything beyond what I planned to play and whether I'd be wearing something more appropriate tomorrow. When it was over, I thanked the servers who had been kinder to me than my own family, stepped outside and walked to my car under the soft glare of streetlights. My shoes clicked against the gravel lot, each step echoing with painful clarity, making me acutely aware of how utterly alone I felt. Back at the Airbnb, I changed out of the beige dress and laid it flat across the guest bed. The fabric caught the overhead light, dull and lifeless. It looked more like a hotel curtain or a dusty tablecloth than a dress meant for a family celebration. I stared at myself in the mirror, really looking at the woman reflected back at me. My reflection didn't flinch, but I felt myself trembling inside. Something in my chest twisted with a familiar ache. Not sharp like a fresh wound, just deep and persistent, like a bruise that was never allowed to heal because someone kept pressing on it deliberately. After a while, I unzipped the front pocket of my suitcase and pulled out the black velvet folder I always brought to performances. Inside were my most treasured pieces: Rachmaninoff, Liszt, Chopin Complex. Passionate music that used to make me feel alive, like I was more than just background noise in someone else's life. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened to the first page, running my fingers over the notes I knew by heart. I wasn't here to take up space or steal anyone's spotlight, but I wasn't here to disappear either. The familiar determination hardened in my chest. I told myself it didn't matter. I was here for peace, for family reconciliation, for closure. But the sun had barely climbed past the magnolia trees when the knot in my stomach told me I'd made a terrible mistake coming here. The wedding ceremony was set outdoors beneath white drapery and low-hanging string lights that were already flickering softly in the early afternoon haze. Garden chairs faced a makeshift altar framed with climbing roses that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Somewhere behind me, a quartet of servers lined up water glasses and repositioned the dessert table under a shaded canopy. I'd arrived early following Elaine's strict orders. She'd wanted me to test the mic. Make sure your little piano works with the setup, her tone implying I might somehow break everything if left unsupervised. The staff had positioned the piano awkwardly behind a catering tent that smelled strongly of chicken marsala and rosemary, almost completely hidden from view. It wasn't near the stage, nor was it angled toward the audience. It was tucked away like an embarrassing piece of furniture someone didn't know where to hide. I ran a hand over the keys, feeling a lump form in my throat as I adjusted the bench, already feeling sweat trickle uncomfortably between my shoulder blades. I was wearing the beige dress again. This time, I hadn't bothered to steam out the creases or fix the crooked hem. What was the point when no one would see me anyway? Elaine's voice rang out behind me, already amplified through a wireless microphone. Let's run a quick sound check, shall we? Just a few notes to make sure it's not too loud. I nodded and played a soft arpeggio, my fingers moving automatically while my mind screamed in protest. The speakers caught the sound late, creating an awkward echo that made the music sound disconnected and out of place. I tried again, playing slower, and Elaine turned toward the gathering crowd, lifting her manicured hand to shield her eyes from the sun. Perfect, she said dismissively. Then she turned back to the guests and smiled warmly into the mic. Everyone welcome. What a beautiful day for a celebration. Before we begin, a quick housekeeping note. Today's ceremony will include some background music. Our little helper will be providing subtle accompaniment throughout. She's always been so good at staying in the background, haven't you, Melody? There was light, uncertain laughter. A few people clapped politely, clearly unsure if they were supposed to acknowledge me or not. I didn't flinch outwardly, but I felt my hand twitch involuntarily on the keys, my body betraying the rage and hurt I was trying so hard to contain. I forced a small, tight smile and focused on the black and ivory keys in front of me. Keep your head down, I whispered to myself. It's only music. You've done this 100 times before. Just get through today. I waited tensely, my heart pounding in my chest. The real signal hadn't come yet, but I could feel the weight of years of similar humiliations pressing down on me. Elaine walked off the platform in her designer heels, and a group of bridesmaids passed by, adjusting their hair, taking selfies, complimenting each other's makeup and dresses. One glanced over at me and said, "Cute dress," in the same tone someone might use to say, "Nice umbrella," during a downpour. Her smirk told me she knew exactly how I'd been sidelined. Then Sophia approached, floating down the aisle like she owned not just this day, but every day before and after it. She looked breathtaking, of course, her custom gowns sculpted to her figure like poured silk, probably costing more than my yearly income. She had always known how to position herself in the perfect light, how to command attention effortlessly. She leaned in close, her lips almost brushing my ear, her expensive perfume overwhelming me with notes of lavender and unspoken superiority. "Play this, won't you?" she whispered, sliding a folded sheet of music onto the stand with manicured fingers. "I wrote it just for today. It's called Promise of a Perfect Day. Simple and quiet, just like you used to play when we were little. Nothing complicated or impressive that might distract from my entrance." I stared down at the handwritten notes, my stomach turning with disbelief. It was painfully basic, with predictable chord progressions and a melody that seemed afraid of itself, tiptoeing rather than dancing. It wasn't just amateur work. It was childish, deliberately simplistic, and she expected me to play it in front of all these people as if it were actual music. The past surged through me like an electric current. Suddenly, I was 17 again, sitting under hot stage lights at the regional competition that could have changed everything. My fingers flying passionately through Chopin's ballad in G minor, my whole body alive with the music. Elaine had sat in the third row, hands folded tightly in her lap, her expression not proud but worried. Sophia had been near the back wearing a floral dress and an impatient frown. When the audience erupted in applause, she hadn't joined in. That same night, she had cried dramatically in the car on the way home. I still remember the theatrical whimper. "You always make everything about you." Elaine had turned around in the front seat and snapped, "Could you just once stop stealing attention from your sister? Why do you always have to show off?" That was the moment something fundamental broke inside me. The piano had once felt like oxygen and fire in my blood. After that night, it felt like something shameful, like vanity, like something I should hide and diminish. I looked at Sophia's sheet music again. Simple and soft, of course. So I'd remain invisible, forgettable, a mere footnote in her perfect day. The guests began to shift in their seats as the official photographer took position. The procession was about to start. I adjusted the music on the stand, fighting the urge to crumple it and walk away. My fingers hovered over the keys, trembling slightly, and I played. The melody tiptoed across the garden like an apologetic child afraid of taking up space. It said nothing of substance. It merely filled silence. It echoed softly against the tent fabric, then vanished before anyone could remember it had existed at all, just as they intended for me. The polite applause from the ceremony still echoed faintly across the lawn when I slipped away from the reception, my heart pounding with a mixture of dread and resolve. I didn't go far. Just beyond the flickering string lights, through the narrow stone path that curved behind the reception tent, past the elaborate flower arrangements that had cost thousands. I found a neglected old greenhouse near the property's edge, and that's where she was Grandma Rose, half sunk into a white wicker chair, her cardigan draped loosely over her shoulders despite the summer heat. She was humming softly the way she always did when her hands weren't busy with knitting or baking. I hadn't realized how desperately I'd missed that comforting sound until I heard it again in the dimming light. She turned her head before I spoke, as if she'd been waiting for me all along. "There you are, my dear," she said. Her voice was thinner than I remembered, but it still carried the same genuine warmth that had comforted me through every disappointment and heartbreak. "You looked so beautiful out there, even if they tried their best to hide you away." I sat down on the small bench across from her, feeling some of the tension leave my body. The silence between us felt like a protective embrace. Familiar, safe, honest. She reached for my hand, her fingers trembling slightly with age as she pressed something into my palm. A yellowed envelope, carefully preserved and protected for years. "Your father meant for you to have this," she whispered, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "They made sure you never saw it. I've kept it safe all these years." I looked down at the envelope, my heart racing. No return address, just my name in my father's distinctive handwriting. The seal had been broken long ago. I opened it slowly, treating it like a fragile treasure that might disintegrate at any moment. Inside was an official letter from Juilliard, offering me a full scholarship summer intensive program, followed by full admission dated 15 years ago. I couldn't breathe. I read it again, my eyes blurring with tears as they caught phrases like exceptional promise and rare control of tone and emotion. The memories flooded back with painful clarity. I remembered that audition, remembered coming home with my fingers still aching from the Rachmaninoff cadenza, my chest heaving with nervous excitement. That very night, Elaine had walked into my room with a solemn expression and said, "They weren't interested. Too many better candidates this year." And just like that, I'd believed her, swallowed the lie whole, my throat tight with disappointment and shame. Grandma Rose didn't speak. She just watched me with knowing eyes, damp with shared grief, but steady with righteous anger. I knew then that she'd known the truth all along. Perhaps not every detail, but enough to understand the magnitude of their betrayal. The rest of the puzzle clicked into place with sickening clarity. Just 1 week after my supposed rejection, Elaine had proudly stood beside Sophia at that elaborate ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Youth Arts Collective, a music nonprofit Sophia supposedly founded with backing from the same foundation that partnered with Juilliard's scholarship program. I remembered the front-page article in the local paper. I remembered how Elaine kept calling Sophia a visionary and naturally gifted leader. I remembered making myself smaller and smaller until I nearly disappeared. My dream hadn't failed me. It had been deliberately stolen and buried for someone else's benefit. I sat there, hunched forward with the weight of this revelation, the letter still in my lap. My fingers had curled into fists, creating a slight crease in the precious paper. I smoothed it gently, my hands shaking with emotion, then folded it again, this time carefully, reverently. A warm breeze rustled through the greenhouse glass. From the main lawn, laughter and music floated in with the faint chime of expensive glassware. Grandma Rose reached over, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear with tender affection. "You were never weak, my darling," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "They just made absolutely sure you felt small enough to forget how incredibly strong and talented you really are." I nodded but couldn't speak past the lump in my throat. The rage and grief battling inside me were too intense for words. Later, when I returned to the reception hall, My heels clicked loudly against the polished hardwood floor, announcing my presence whether they wanted it heard or not. The lights inside had dimmed for the wedding slideshow. Everyone faced the projector screen, half lit in flickering images of carefully curated family memories. The title card read, "Our Journey Sophia and Family." I stood near the back, my arms crossed tightly across my chest. The first slide showed Sophia at 4 in a tutu. The next showed her blowing out candles on her 6th birthday cake. Then came recital photos, Sophia holding a tiny violin, then posing with a local choir. There were vacation photos, holiday dinners. A professionally edited video clip of Elaine adjusting Sophia's award sash at a middle school ceremony. I waited, scanning each image with increasing disbelief. The slideshow continued for 15 full minutes. There were no pictures of me, not a single one. Not even in group family photos where I had definitely been present. No holiday gatherings. No piano competitions or awards, despite my many trophies. Not even the group shot at the lake house from our last family vacation, where I knew for a fact I'd been the one behind the camera because our father had insisted I be included. The audience clapped politely as the slideshow ended. Elaine stood and lifted a champagne glass, the crystal catching the amber spotlight. "To my beautiful daughter," she said, her voice thick with practiced emotion. "Every moment with you has been a joy to relive." I didn't lift my glass. I didn't even blink. My eyes stayed fixed on the blank screen, now white again like a canvas wiped clean of my existence. Like a history book with my chapters torn out. They hadn't just edited the story of our family. They had methodically erased me from it entirely. I didn't cause a scene. I didn't walk out, though every cell in my body screamed at me to run. But inside me, something fundamental shifted. A crushing weight I'd carried for years, the need to be quiet, to be good, to not upset the perfect image began to slide off my shoulders inch by inch. This time the truth would not be buried with me beneath it. The air was still cool when I arrived at the hotel the next morning. That heavy quiet that only settles in the hours before a high society wedding. I walked through the valet lot, clutching my folder of sheet music and adjusting the hem of that faded beige dress, still crooked on one side. Still a visual reminder of my assigned place. I approached the main entrance with my printed confirmation in hand, expecting at least a professional nod from the staff. Instead, I was stopped abruptly. A hotel coordinator, clipboard in one hand, wireless headset clipped to her ear, held up her palm without even looking at me. "Hi, vendors and service personnel are checking in around the back entrance," she said dismissively, checking something off her list. I felt heat rise to my face. "I'm not with catering," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. "I'm the bride's sister, Melody Wren." She blinked, pausing to actually look at me for the first time. "Oh," she said slowly, flipping through her pages with obvious confusion. "Sorry, You weren't listed in the family section at all. We had you categorized with music services and vendors." I stood frozen, hearing the words echo in the marble atrium. She waved over another staff member with a strained smile. "It's fine. Just let her through, I guess." Despite this clarification, I was still led around the side entrance, through the service hallway past staff carrying linens and a teenager unboxing champagne flutes. When I finally emerged into the preparation area of the grand ballroom, I had the bizarre realization that I had never truly been allowed to enter through the front door of my family's life. Later, I made my way into the adjoining breakfast room for the family welcome meal. Elaine had organized a small formal affair, her version of sophisticated charm, complete with assigned seating and custom monogrammed napkins. The tables were arranged in a wide U shape with elegant place cards. I searched for mine, my eyes scanning past Sophia's prominent position, past cousins, past family friends, past even distant relatives who hadn't been seen in years. My stomach dropped when I finally found it. My card wasn't next to any family members at all. It wasn't even in the section labeled family. It was a small, plain card at the very edge of the room, set slightly askew like an afterthought. Melody Wren, piano accompanist. I stood there, staring at those words, feeling blood rush to my face. A staff member breezed by, adjusted a floral centerpiece, and glanced at me like I was blocking her path. I sat down quietly, my hands trembling in my lap. From across the room, I watched everyone else filter in, greeting each other with hugs and laughter. A cousin wearing a matching blush pink wrap dress that coordinated perfectly with the bridal party. Another bridesmaid squealed delightedly over mimosas. Then came Elaine, gliding in with the practiced confidence of someone who knew exactly where she belonged in any room. Sophia entered last, naturally. Her hair was swept into an elegant chignon, her skin glowing with expensive treatments under the soft gold lighting. When she stepped into the room, people actually applauded as if royalty had arrived. Elaine walked to her, kissed her cheek with maternal pride. Then she turned toward me with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Try not to play too loud during the vows," she said under her breath, pretending to adjust Sophia's necklace. "It's Sophia's moment. We don't need you ruining it with your showing off." I nodded stiffly but didn't respond because the words burning in my throat would have erupted as a scream that would have shattered every crystal glass in the room. Instead, I stood and excused myself, muttering something vague about needing to check the piano tuning. No one acknowledged my exit or seemed to notice I was gone. Out in the hallway, I leaned against the cold marble wall, feeling it cool my flushed skin as I pulled my phone from my clutch with shaking hands. I opened my draft folder. There it was, just as I'd left it weeks ago. Subject Resignation Community Arts Program. I had written the draft assuming that after this wedding, after keeping my head down one last time and playing the role they expected, I'd be free to walk away. I'd leave teaching, leave music altogether, cut the final thread that kept me hoping for something that was never going to come. But now, with the weight of what I'd learned pressing on my chest, I wasn't so sure that was the right path. I stared at the blinking cursor on my phone screen. My finger hovered over delete, then over send. Then I simply locked the screen without doing either. I reached into my bag for tissues to blot my eyes. Instead, my fingers closed around something firmer, thicker. The Juilliard letter. I had placed it there before leaving the Airbnb, tucked carefully beside my lipstick. And the small metronome keychain my father had given me for my 16th birthday. I pulled it out, my thumb tracing over the crease I'd made last night. Full academic award. Room and board. 5 simple words that had once meant everything, then were turned to nothing and now burned with new meaning altogether. I could have gone. I should have gone. I was meant to go. And the crushing realization hit me anew. It wasn't because I wasn't talented enough or ready. It was because someone had deliberately made that choice for me, stolen it from me and called it love and protection. I took a few deep breaths, steady but tight, feeling something hardening within me. Then I carefully folded the letter and slipped it back into my bag. When I returned to the breakfast room, the plates were mostly cleared. People laughed over coffee. Someone had started yet another toast to the happy couple. Sophia beamed under the attention like a flower turning toward the sun. I walked back to my isolated seat without a word. My head held higher than before. Before sitting, I unlatched the leather folder of sheet music I'd carried all morning. Tucked behind the requested selections was my own composition. Handwritten, meticulously edited, with dynamic markings and crescendos I had mapped with pencil years ago when I still believed my music mattered. I switched the sheet music, my heart pounding. No one saw, no one asked, but they would certainly hear the difference. I would make sure of it. By the time guests began to settle into their white folding chairs beneath the magnolia canopy, the air had turned thick with anticipation and humidity. I stood alone near the piano, half hidden in shadow, half squinting in the harsh glare from the sun filtering through the draped linen canopy. My dress, still that faded beige, still obviously inappropriate compared to the coordinated wedding party, blended perfectly into the background fabric, fulfilling its intended purpose of making me nearly invisible. I could hear the excited chatter of relatives and friends, waiters skillfully navigating with trays of champagne and beyond the decorative curtain at the garden's edge. Sophia's voice laughing with that practiced musical tone she'd perfected over years of being the center of attention. I glanced down at the keyboard, my body humming with nervous energy as I rested my hands above the keys. My fingers hovered there, not yet touching, just breathing in the moment of decision. They'd been explicit about what I was to play. Promise of a perfect day. A piece that wasn't written for musical expression but for appearance. Light, forgettable, insignificant, calculated to make the bride look radiant without drawing attention anywhere else. But as the cue for the first note approached, I didn't reach for Sophia's childish composition. Instead, I pulled out my own work. The piece I'd hidden between the pages like a secret self I'd protected all these years. I placed it gently onto the stand, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. Then I began to play. The first note emerged slowly, heavier than I'd intended. carrying the weight of 15 years of silence. But then the second note found its voice, and the third reached deeper still. It was a melody I hadn't played for anyone in 15 years. I'd composed it during those lonely afternoons in high school when the world felt simultaneously overwhelming and empty. I had played it privately to console myself when the rejection letters supposedly came, not knowing they had never been sent at all. The chords were rich and complex, moving from dark, questioning progressions to rising, soaring phrases, minor turns that flirted with hope and possibility. There was no simple, neat resolution, just the raw, honest truth I'd carried inside for too long. The guests shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. A few whispered to each other, confused by this unexpected deviation. Someone cleared their throat pointedly, but no one dared interrupt, and I didn't stop. Gradually, a hush settled over the crowd like a spell. Even the servers paused at the tense edge, trays balanced forgotten in their hands. Then, halfway through the piece, just as I lifted into the emotional bridge section, the speakers crackled with unexpected feedback. A man's voice suddenly filled the garden. Not a stranger's voice, but my father's. To my daughter Melody, the one who taught herself to fly even when we deliberately clipped her wings. I felt a collective intake of breath spread across the lawn like a wave. Several heads turned sharply, including the minister, who looked completely bewildered. The recording continued, my father's voice worn with emotion but clear in its purpose. I'm recording this the day Juilliard called with your full scholarship. I have the official letter in my hand. I wish I could have protected your dream longer. I wish I'd fought harder against what they're planning. My hands froze, suspended above the keys as shock ran through me. The last time I had heard that voice was at his funeral 7 years ago. My heart squeezed painfully in my chest. The recording played on, not lengthy, but detailed enough to expose every manipulation, naming dates, amounts transferred, and agreements made. It laid bare every room I'd been locked out of, every opportunity stolen. It said exactly what no one else had ever dared to say aloud. Gasps turned to stunned silence. Sophia, who had been framed perfectly at the start of the aisle for her entrance, stood motionless, clutching her bouquet so tightly the stems were bending. Her face had drained of colour beneath her perfect makeup. Elaine remained eerily still, her eyes narrowed toward the speaker system as if her glare alone could silence the truth echoing across the garden. I closed my eyes and allowed the final notes of my composition to fall gently from my fingers. They didn't land in applause. They landed in a silence so profound it seemed to have physical weight. The kind of silence that swells in your chest and forces people to look at each other with new, uncomfortable understanding. For what felt like eternity, no one moved. I finally looked up, meeting the eyes of the guests directly for the first time. Not even the breeze stirred the decorations. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel invisible or unimportant. I felt undeniable, real, impossible to erase. The final chord still hung in the air, suspended between the branches of the magnolia trees and the shocked silence that had swallowed the courtyard whole. No one spoke. No one seemed to even breathe. Sophia remained frozen beneath the floral archway, her bouquet visibly wilting in her tight grip. Elaine hadn't spoken, but her eyes darted frantically around the gathering as if searching for a script that would save her, a prepared statement that had somehow slipped from her grasp. Then came the sound of a chair creaking as someone stood. It was Director Collins. He had once been my conductor years ago, when I still naively believed that exceptional talent would inevitably be recognized despite politics and connections. Now older, heavier, but no less commanding in his presence, he stood from the second row and stepped forward with the deliberate confidence of someone accustomed to commanding attention. In his hand was a folded document, its edges worn from years of careful preservation. I wasn't sure if this would ever leave my briefcase, he began, his voice carrying clearly across the silent garden. 15 years ago, I personally signed this letter on Juilliard's letterhead, confirming a full scholarship for Melody Wren, whose audition was one of the most remarkable I'd heard in decades. Shocked gasps rippled across the crowd like wind cutting through tall grass. He raised the page so everyone could see the official letterhead and seal. Her acceptance was not only confirmed, but celebrated by the committee. Her attendance was later blocked by external intervention. I couldn't breathe. My fingers gripped the edge of the piano bench so tightly my knuckles turned white. Elaine's complexion had gone ashen. She clutched the armrests of her chair as if trying to physically anchor herself against the tide of truth threatening to sweep her away. Her lips parted, then closed again, words failing her perhaps for the first time in her life. But Sophia, ever the performer, stepped forward, forcing a light laugh as she shook her head dismissively. That letter, it was obviously never mailed for good reason. You can't possibly have proof she could have handled that level of pressure. That kind of prestigious institution. Director Collins turned to face her directly, his expression calm but unyielding. It wasn't mailed because someone in her family specifically requested the foundation redirect the scholarship funds to a different project. That request, I do have in writing, along with the bank transfer records. A murmur erupted across the gathering, growing louder with each second. This wasn't confusion or shock anymore, it was the sound of collective realization. Guests turned toward Elaine, then toward Sophia. Several people stood from their seats, moving closer as if needing to witness this moment of truth personally. I remained still, my breathing shallow. I didn't need to defend myself. The truth was finally doing that for me. A small voice, barely audible above the growing buzz, cut through the noise. She taught me everything. Every head turned toward the source. It was Lily, just 12 years old, wearing braces and simple ballet flats, one of my dedicated piano students from the community centre. She had stepped forward from where she sat with her parents, twisting a wrinkled tissue nervously between her fingers. She taught me what it means to truly believe in your sound, even when no one else hears it or values it. Her young voice cracked with emotion, but she continued bravely. I used to play so quietly no one could hear me. I used to whisper when I talked, too. Even when I played, I was afraid to make noise. She told me that staying silent doesn't make you safe or good. It just makes you easier to ignore and forget. Her last words came out barely above a whisper, but they struck with the force of thunder. Lily looked toward me, her eyes shining with tears but filled with fierce pride. Then she turned and walked back to her seat, her shoulders straight. There was no applause, no music, just the heavy shifting of bodies as people processed what they'd witnessed. A woman from the groom's side, his aunt, as I later discovered, said in a voice just loud enough for those around her to hear. She's honestly the only reason I didn't leave during that endless second toast. I've never heard Rachmaninoff played with such feeling. Another gentleman nearby nodded emphatically. Absolutely. The real talent's been hiding at the piano all along. I still hadn't moved from my seat. My hands rested calmly in my lap now. My gaze remained steady, meeting the eyes of anyone who looked my way. Elaine appeared on the verge of speaking, her mouth opening as if to shout commands or explanations, but remarkably no one handed her a microphone. For perhaps the first time in her carefully choreographed life, there was no convenient rescue, no moment where she could seize control of the narrative. And Sophia. She reached desperately for the microphone stand positioned behind the floral pedestals, but her hand grasped empty air. The microphone had vanished, removed by someone who had apparently decided her time in the spotlight had come to an end. I didn't smile, not because I didn't feel something powerful rise within me, but because what I felt wasn't simple joy or triumph. It was something deeper, more profound. The sensation of a truth finally breaking through 15 years of carefully constructed lies. Sophia's fingers hovered awkwardly in the air, twitching with frustrated entitlement. The microphone she'd reached for had disappeared completely, as if someone had quietly decided she'd had enough time to speak for several lifetimes. She cleared her throat, her cheeks flushing with angry embarrassment as she raised her voice to compensate for the lack of amplification. Let's not get completely derailed by theatrical accusations, she began, her tone noticeably higher than her usual carefully modulated speech, straining to project authority she no longer commanded. This day, this beautiful ceremony was meant to be a celebration of love, of union and family, not personal grievances or dramatic performances. Her gaze swept across the courtyard like an actress trying to win back a hostile audience. I understand emotions are running high, she continued, pressing one hand dramatically to her chest in a practiced gesture of sincerity. But surely we can all agree that unverified letters and staged recordings don't belong at a wedding ceremony. She paused expectantly, waiting for murmurs of agreement or at least sympathetic nods. There were none. The silence was deafening. Still, she pressed forward with increasing desperation. I have documentation right here proving that Melody's application was rejected for legitimate reasons. I never wanted to share this publicly, but given the circumstances. She turned, gesturing imperiously to a man in an expensive dark suit who reluctantly handed her a printed document from a slim leather portfolio. She held it up triumphantly like an attorney presenting critical evidence. Juilliard said no. The committee found her technically skilled but lacking emotional depth. So while I'm sure this dramatic story was heartfelt, it simply isn't factual. And I'm sorry, but we can't allow a frustrated piano player to completely hijack an entire wedding with fantasy and bitterness. I didn't flinch at her words. I didn't blink. But I felt the weight of every stare shifting between us like ripples across still water, testing, measuring, judging who spoke truth. For an excruciating moment, the crowd remained silent and uncertain, weighing her confident delivery against the evidence they'd just witnessed. The lie was polished, delivered smoothly, and clearly rehearsed many times. I recognized the tactic immediately. She was attempting to quickly reframe the narrative while emotions were raw and confusion lingered. Elaine gave her a slight, encouraging nod from her seat, the familiar signal that said, "Keep going. They still might believe you if you sound confident enough." And for one terrible heartbeat, I saw uncertainty flicker across some faces. The power of a confident lie had worked for them for 15 years. Why not once more? Then a deep voice interrupted from the side aisle. "Frankly, I don't care who said what on paper," the man said, standing tall in an impeccably tailored grey jacket. "I want to hear her play again." That was the most moving piece of music I've heard in years. A murmur of agreement ran through the guests. Someone began to clap deliberately. Another joined in, then another and another, until the sound swelled around me. And none of it, not a single hand clap, was for Sophia or her elaborate performance. She tried to speak again, raising her voice to be heard. But her words were completely drowned out, under the wave of growing applause. The spotlight that had been fixed exclusively on her perfect wedding for months now turned decisively back toward the grand piano and the woman they had tried to hide. I stood with quiet dignity, the faded beige fabric of my dress brushing against my legs as I walked back to the bench. There was no speech, no triumphant declaration. I simply sat down and placed my hands on the keys where they belonged. Someone had already placed my music folder back on the stand, but I reached inside for a different composition. One I had handwritten years ago and never completed until the night before. Sitting alone in my Airbnb room with 15 years of silenced music finally finding its voice. The melody began in the lower register, deep and questioning, a single melodic line that spoke of loss and missed opportunities. Then another voice joined it, higher, more hopeful. And finally came the thread that bound them together, the simple lullaby my grandmother used to hum to me as a child. The one I had heard her humming beside the hydrangeas just yesterday. The notes weren't sweet or sentimental. They were resolute and honest. The chords didn't beg for sympathy. They spoke truth. And as the music built and climbed, weaving through every betrayal, every dismissal, every moment I was told to make myself smaller and quieter, I felt my heart expanding with each measure, not with rage or even grief, but with the piercing clarity of finally being heard. People leaned forward in their seats, completely entranced. Some stood to see better, drawn to the piano they had previously ignored. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a young staff member approach the front of the gathering. In his hand, slightly crumpled but intact, was the original wedding invitation that had started everything. The one that had labelled me music provider subject to change. He placed it gently beside the piano bench. Someone had scribbled over the original text in blue ink. 4 words, small but powerful, the one they buried. But beneath that, someone else had crossed out those words and written in bolder, more confident strokes. The one they should have celebrated all along. I continued playing, pouring everything into the music. I didn't look up to see reactions. Not even when I heard someone openly crying in the 3rd row. Not even when Sophia turned her back to the assembled guests. And not even when Elaine slowly, silently rose from her seat and slipped out the side garden gate, her perfectly constructed world crumbling around her. My composition ended not with dramatic flourish, but with quiet resolution, like a lake returning to stillness after a storm. No performance cue was needed. The applause erupted spontaneously, thunderous and authentic. Not polite, not obligatory. Genuine appreciation that echoed across the courtyard, across the trees, across 15 years of enforced silence. And it seemed it would never end. The afternoon wind had picked up by the time the last guests filtered out of the garden courtyard. Rose petals that had been meticulously arranged for the ceremony now scattered across the brick walkway, dancing in small whirlwinds. Half-full champagne flutes stood abandoned on tables, lipstick marks and fingerprints leaving evidence of the celebration that had transformed into something entirely unexpected. The hired string quartet quietly packed up their instruments without any fanfare. The applause had long since faded, but its energy still hummed in the air like electricity. I remained seated with Grandma Rose on the stone terrace of the hotel. She had brought us 2 cups of tea in fine china cups. Hers was steeped strong and dark the way she preferred it. Mine lighter and sweetened with honey. Though neither of us had taken more than a sip, she leaned slightly forward in her chair, her weathered fingers gently folded around the Juilliard envelope like she was cradling something precious back to life. "The world didn't misjudge your talent, darling," she said, her voice soft but certain. "They just took far too long to finally hear what I've always known was there." I couldn't find words to respond. I just watched her fold the Juilliard letter with careful precision. The same loving way she used to fold warm towels fresh from the dryer when I was small. Below us on the garden path, Elaine walked past with hurried steps. She didn't stop, didn't pause. Just moved quickly with clipped heels and rigid shoulders, her gaze fixed on some distant point, as if she could walk away from what had happened. She didn't look up at me sitting on the terrace. And for the first time in my adult life, I didn't automatically lower my eyes in her presence. The power she had held over me had finally shattered. Sophia stood alone at the edge of the stone steps near one of the magnolia trees. She clutched her wedding bouquet like she'd forgotten she was still holding it. Not a single guest had followed her. Not even her bridesmaids. Not even the wedding planner who had been constantly at her side for months. She caught my eye from across the distance. There was a moment, brief and barely perceptible, where her chin lifted slightly in that familiar, expectant way, as if waiting for me to come to her. Say something comforting. Offer some kind of reconciliation or graceful exit from her humiliation. I didn't move. She blinked first and looked away, and I remained seated beside my grandmother, feeling neither triumph nor pity, just a quiet certainty that some bridges cannot and should not be rebuilt. Later that evening, as the clean-up crew efficiently folded chairs and packed away decorations, I overheard fragments of conversation near the exit. A man in an expensive dark suit, one of the foundation donors who had spoken with Director Collins earlier, was engaged in serious discussion with several board members. I caught only pieces misleading financial representation, serious ethical concern, immediate board review required. They were discussing Sophia's Music Foundation and its funding sources. Elaine's name surfaced repeatedly in hushed tones, then faded just as quickly. The words weren't shouted or dramatic, just stated with the kind of calm certainty that remains long after emotional outbursts have been forgotten. Inside the venue's office, someone was updating the official event program on the hotel's website. Through the open glass doors, I watched as the line beneath musical performance changed before my eyes. No longer background accompaniment by family member. Now it read, feature performance, Melody Wren, original composition, Silenced Wings. I didn't smile, but I felt my lungs expand fully for what felt like the first time in years. A staff member approached from the side garden. The same young man who had recognized the truth earlier. He held the crumpled invitation in his hand, now even more wrinkled than before. "Someone left this near the piano after your performance," he said with genuine respect in his voice. "I thought you might want to keep it." I opened it carefully. The words "music provider subject to change" were still visible, but now crossed out with multiple lines, covered by a message written in bold black ink, pressed so deeply into the paper fibers that it would never be erased. "Thank you for making us truly hear the music today." 2 weeks later, I pinned that note to my corkboard in my office at the community centre where I continued teaching. Just beneath it, I unfolded and mounted that old recital programme from my teenage years, the one I hadn't looked at in more than a decade. My name remained there in elegant script, Melody Wren, soloist. I didn't cry as I looked at them side by side, but I left them both displayed proudly, no longer hidden. It was a Monday morning when I met her, my newest student, 13 years old with awkward elbows too sharp for the bench, sneakers too colourful for the serious practice room. She barely spoke when her parents left, but she never broke eye contact when she finally sat down at the piano. I asked her if she wanted to start with basic scales. She shook her head firmly. "Everyone says I'm too quiet to matter," she mumbled, fingers hovering uncertainly over the keys, too invisible to be noticed or heard. I looked at her and for the briefest moment saw myself reflected back. Hands smaller, voice softer, but heart burning with the same fire that had never truly been extinguished. So I smiled and said with all the conviction I'd reclaimed, "Then let's play something they can't possibly ignore." She looked down at the keys with new determination, and I looked ahead to the future with hope. Not because I needed applause or spotlight. I just needed to be heard. And this time, finally, the world was listening.